In Berlin bin ich im Jahr 2008 zum ersten Mal mit meinem Lieblingsmaterial in Berührung gekommen, mit Knete, da habe ich das kennengelernt.
It was a very strong feeling that Berlin was extremely open, very cheap at the time, and as a young student artist it gave me a lot of capability to concentrate on work and less concentrate on money issues.
When I first moved to Berlin, I thought, oh, it's going to be like Hamburg because my granddad lives there. And I was pretty surprised coming here, what a kind of rough city it was.
I was 1 year at the residency at KunstLAB ELES, and that's how I stayed.
Warum ich Berlin als Standort gewählt habe, ist eigentlich, ich bin in erster Linie nach Deutschland gekommen und vielleicht, wenn das die erste Linie war, dann war die 0. Linie, dass ich das nicht selber ausgesucht habe, sondern dass meine Familie nach Deutschland emigriert ist, als ich 4 Jahre alt war.
I didn't like it so much. I didn't have a good time here. I didn't feel so great. And also I felt that it's actually Tel Aviv, just bigger.
I came to Berlin for a 6 months internship together with my wife Katharina, and since she already was pregnant, we decided to stay longer, and here we are. We're still here in Berlin.
Berlin is for lost souls, lost Jewish souls, and I'm a lost Jewish soul, and Berlin is like with a mother that opened her hand, okay, come back to us.
Work-wise, I would say I don't work in any medium. And I think also, maybe as a small anecdote, because I didn't come from the art world, I grew in a very religious world, where actually thinking and conceptualism is quite part of the studies. But I didn't come with this kind of medium background, artistic background. One of the works that I'll be showing as well in December at the Tel Aviv Museum, I call them untitled window bars. And I actually look at very typical window bars. And I always used to look at these window bars in a sense of kind of, on the one hand, it's a material which is quite almost violent, or it's quite rough. It's a metal structure that's supposed to protect you from the outside. I call them window bar paintings / sculptures, where I actually use the window bar to create a painting, but the window bar still stays in its structure. So for example, the first time I showed it was at the Tel Aviv Museum in its collection exhibition, and it was interesting for me to see also the difference between, in Israel it's very clear where this form comes from, and then I showed it here in Berlin at a group show at the Kunstwerk, and I think in Europe or in Germany it's the form is maybe more exotic and oriental, which I think is also a difference of how a material changes depending on the place it's being shown and its culture and its history. And then I was working on it in New York as well, and it was interesting to see that in New York the first association, even though this for me was nothing I thought about, were in Brooklyn. The Orthodox families apparently have a lot of window bars because they have a lot of children, so they have to keep kind of the safety rules. And they actually even create something quite interesting where they make the window bar deeper, so you kind of have a window bar balcony where the kids kind of sit on.
Doing art, and I'm doing Jewish art, so to say. This work behind me is I call it menorah, and each picture is, so to say, the candle. I took something from the idea of the Enlightenment and into with self-portraits of myself dressed up as a chassid and slowly taking my clothes off. So to say, as a parable to the enlightenment that the Jews from Hasidmus went out from the derech. So this is my outcoming, so to say, picture that shows myself slowly taking off the clothes that makes me part of this Jewish tradition. If we take, for example, the picture of the challah from the Syria Judaica, so there is this challah covered with this nice white cloth of Shabbat, and the challah that's in my memory is this Shabbos, my mother doing the challah Friday for the Shabbat, and then you have the kiddush, and the wine drops slowly because the cup is so full, and looking how the drops fall on the bread and kind of makes a kind of unpure the white cloth. This was important for me to put it in the picture. This cup of kiddush is holy because it symbolizes something that all the idea of holiness, the concept of rituals is to create a connection to something that is much more above, that is the holiness as idea, as a concept. To bring it into our life, we make a ritual. The same practice that you try to achieve with art, you try to achieve through religious practice. I think this way it took me time to understand, but that's something that is very strongly bind with my Jewish traditional background and my practice as an artist. Thinking of how to bring the idea, the concept into our physical, into the camera, the dark camera obscura, so to say, and take out from it an image that is an example of the idea.
Quasi zurückblickend gibt es auf alle Fälle ein Thema oder eine Sache, die wie so eine Grundvoraussetzung ist für die meisten der Arbeiten und die sich dann wiederum eigentlich unterschiedlich in den Arbeiten zeigt. Und diese Annahme ist, dass ich eigentlich denke, dass alles schon da ist und dass ich mich oft gefragt habe in den Arbeiten, wie kann ich das machen, dass ich quasi dem, was da ist, gewissermaßen verhelfe, sich selber zu zeigen. Also es fängt an in der Materialauswahl, und zwar arbeite ich hauptsächlich mit chinesischem Reispapier und Tusche. Und ich versuche, also bei 4 Farben habe ich kein anderes weiteres Material hinzugefügt, sondern nur Wasser, mit dem ich die Tusche verdünnt habe. Und dabei ist es so, dass in diesem einen Vorgang eigentlich 3 Schichten gleichzeitig passieren oder gleichzeitig mitbewegt werden. Das ist einmal die Wand, dann kommt das Papier da drauf und dann, wenn das eingestrichen wird mit der Tusche, ist es so, dass durch das eine Streichen noch ein Druck entsteht auf der Wand und dann habe ich das wieder abgelöst, so dass dieser Druck auch sichtbar wird. Und der andere Gedanke, also der auch wieder anknüpft an, es ist eigentlich alles da, oder okay, die Frage, die mich da interessiert hat, war nochmal eine andere, und zwar habe ich gedacht, wie kann ich eigentlich versuchen, diese Wand zu öffnen? Und weil ich glaube, wir gehen so oft her und sagen, okay, wie viel passt auf diese Wand drauf? Und das interessiert mich nicht. Und zwar war meine Frage, wie kann ich eigentlich diese Wand öffnen mit diesen einfachen Mitteln auch? Also seit 2016 habe ich mit dem Übersetzerkollektiv Versatorium zusammengearbeitet. Und dabei ist es so, dass ich eigentlich das erste Mal das Gefühl hatte, dass ich jetzt Deutsch lerne, dass ich diese Sprache verstehe, weil ich immer irgendwie das Gefühl hatte, das ist nicht meins. Und durch das gemeinsame Übersetzen ich überhaupt nochmal reflektiert habe, was eigentlich meine Sprachen sind und meine Sprache ist. Und mit der Annahme, dass alles da ist, ich eigentlich gerade an einer Arbeit bin, wo ich, wie soll ich sagen, die ganzen kulturellen Räume, in denen ich mich bewegt habe oder quasi bewege und die man, oder eigentlich ist es noch mehr auf meine Kindheit bezogen, in der man sich vor allen Dingen als Kind ganz natürlich bewegt und switcht und eigentlich haargenau weiß, wo man sich wie zu verhalten hat, dass ich die nochmal reflektiere in dieser Arbeit.
This series of images I made in 2016 titled Earth was made on the Cinema 4D program, and I basically try to visualize in 6 stages the creation of the world in the first chapter of Bereshit, and formulating this language into a material visual abstraction, and what happens when we then take this passage, this very old passage, and then confront it with this new kind of software program, and what kind of discourse comes about from this. I find it interesting with Jewish discourse that there's always a leeway for cross-examination and multi-meanings. No association to a passage is necessarily wrong. It's all built on our own narratives towards how we perceive the language. And I was interested especially in how language today has become an alphabet of symbols and semiotics that don't necessarily have a definite meaning and have various different associations, and it's a new language that's constantly growing, and I think this discourse relates to my kind of Jewish take on integration and understanding universal ethics in different visual ways, coming back from my liberal Jewish background.
I come from background of theater and dance, and I create works in the field of installation and visual art. I am all the time busy with the idea of the observer and who watches, who participates, and where does the work happen? Like, is the work just the installation by itself, or does it happen when somebody enters into it? And my main work out of it was the performance collecting points, which was a happening. I was just like really busy with the institution of the university, and I realized that in order to become a bachelor graduate, one has to obtain 180 points, which are those credit points. And I thought, okay, if it's just to collect 180 points, who cares what kind of points it is? So I just filled the room with 7 kilos of confetti, and I invited the audience of the festival where I showed it to become graduates of dance studies, and all they had to do was to collect 180 points, because this is actually what they have to do. And then, like you saw, people going down on their knees and starting to collect the points, which was also fascinating how they immediately got into the thing, to start to collect. And nowadays I deal a lot with the institution of masterpieces. So how the narrative of masterpieces and the cultural heritage and legacy that comes mostly from Europe, the Western society, and mostly through times of Renaissance and Baroque, how does this actually turns to be an institution with politics of itself and how the institution of masterpieces actually shapes what the people think about art, just because of a certain legacy that somehow still kind of holding strongly and grasping the concept of what art is. And yeah, and in that sense I really see this narrative turning into an institution. And that's exactly the work that I'm dealing with right now.
Meine Arbeitsweise ist sehr intuitiv und ich erzähle oft beziehungsweise meistens sehr persönliche Geschichten, die mir selbst passiert sind oder Geschichten meiner Familie. Im Moment sind es 2 Projekte, an denen ich arbeite. Das erste Projekt ist ein Dokumentarfilm Galandia, Holland. In dem geht es um die Lebensgeschichte meiner Großmutter, die in Israel lebt. Und im zweiten Projekt erzähle ich die Geschichte meiner Kleinstfamilie sozusagen, also die Geschichte meiner Eltern. Beide Projekte haben also mit Migration zu tun und somit mit dem Jüdischsein, mit meinem Jüdischsein und mit dem Jüdischsein meiner Familie. Es im Laufe des Prozesses geplant war, dass meine Eltern reden, ich Interviews mit denen führe und die können nicht, mögen nicht oder können nicht. Und das ist aber das Hauptthema dieses Filmes. Und durch diesen komischen emotionalen Stau, der entstanden ist beim Projekt, oder das ist vielleicht auch kein emotionaler Stau gewesen, sondern auch wirklich eine Frustration, weil ich nicht weiterkam, habe ich, wie ich das jeden Sonntag tue, mit meiner Oma geskypt. Und an dem einen Sonntag habe ich ihr meinen Freund vorgestellt. Und weil er zufällig Experte für die Geschichte der Sowjetunion ist, hat er sie total unbefangen gefragt, ob es in unserer Familie Betroffene vom stalinistischen Regime gibt. Und dann hat sie einfach Ja gesagt. Und so kamen wir von einer Frage zur nächsten und es hat sich herausgestellt, dass unsere Familie sehr wohl und sehr direkt von dieser Zeit, also von den stalinistischen Säuberungen in 1937 betroffen war. Und diese neue Information, diese für mich absolut neue Information hat einen Riesenfass aufgemacht, weil bestimmte Sachen klar geworden sind. Ich habe zum ersten Mal angefangen, darüber nachzudenken oder vielleicht angefangen zu verstehen, warum meine Eltern schweigen. Und ich war in Israel und ich wollte mit meiner Oma einfach über alles Mögliche sprechen. Und in diesen Gesprächen ging es sehr viel auch um Jüdischsein meiner Oma oder um Jüdischsein im Allgemeinen. Nachdem der Film Galandia gefühlt fertig war und ich den Eindruck hatte, okay, die Geschichte meiner Oma oder das, was sie mir zu erzählen hatte, ist im Großen und Ganzen ein Film geworden, habe ich einen Riesenschub, einen Inspirationsschub bekommen. Und ich habe das Gefühl, dass sich neue Wege eröffnet haben, um das aufzuzeigen, was ich bis jetzt für unmöglich gehalten habe. Also das Dokumentarische dieses Films so zu verarbeiten, dass ich keine Stimmen meiner Eltern brauche, sondern sie auf anderen Wegen zeigen kann. Ob das jetzt ausschließlich Super 8 Filme sein werden oder ausschließlich Knete oder eine Mischung daraus, da bin ich jetzt mittendrin und versuche das rauszufinden.
So I wanted to join the fire brigade for a while, but it was quite an amazing experience of just seeing the city through this rare window, and also they're German. Like in Berlin, you kind of almost don't perceive this real German audience because there's so many different type of immigrants here, and with some help of funding, I will also go to join the fire brigade in Israel for a while. Yes, so the sculpture that I'm showing now in Vienna, it's kind of like a dreadlock of chain reaction of the sculpture moves and then it activates the sound and the light. And the action that he's doing is a bit like a raging bull, like starting his movement like with the legs. And also it's kind of related to my experience at the fire brigade that one of the main things they do like on a daily basis is break into doors. And this kind of like this moment that you break in and the light comes out. So it's kind of indirectly related to that. And the sound is the same sound that I used also in the film, which is kind of drum, very small segments of drums mixed together. There are Jewish-related issues in my work for sure, but at the moment it's more kind of this cultural like alienation of being here or being somewhere else. And of course there are moments that kind of remind you of the past. But I think more than anything, it's this them and me kind of feeling that I think will always be there. I mean, I don't see it as a negative thing, it's just like that.
Interesting enough, the first time I appeared in this Jewish context, it was when I was invited to KunstLAB Dresden to participate in an exhibition that carried the title "What can you mach?" Back then I already was with my friend Peter. We were already working on a project that we since then entitled "The Idol of Denial." We dealt with a former synagogue in a southern Hungarian city of Kecskemét that was abandoned after the war and that was then sold to the city in the late 60s. And that was in the early 70s turned into the House of Science and Technology. And we were dealing with a very specific phenomenon there, that a series of plaster copies of Michelangelo's statues have been exhibited there 40 years ago, amongst them the figure of Moses. So what we did is we made a film about a story that a group of sculptors entered this former synagogue and they produce a copy of this plaster copy of Michelangelo's Moses, and through this act they animate this figure, and once it's ready it becomes alive and it starts to talk about its own context within this building, what it means for it to be there. Basically it had a scientific lecture in front of a small crowd in the auditorium of this House of Science and Culture that's already rid of every sign of it once having been a synagogue. So while we were working on this project, we learned about the history of these plaster copies. They were produced for the Museum of Fine Arts in Budapest in the middle of the 19th century. They produced them with the intention to create a basic collection for the new Museum of Fine Arts, because it was the hegemonic collection policy of all the museums of Europe that couldn't afford to buy the originals. While working on Idol of Denial, on this Moses project, we discovered that there is another synagogue not far from in Tata. There's another synagogue that is filled, it's much smaller than the Kecskemét synagogue, and it is entirely filled with antiques, Roman and Greek sculpture. It became a museum of Roman and antique plaster copies. Apparently this is a project we are working on as we speak. The first time we visited this Tata synagogue that's filled with these sculptures, we discovered that we just came in the right time, because just a few months from then they have started to get rid of all these sculptures, because apparently there's another institution in another part of Hungary that needs a new function. So all these sculptures, they will be transported there. What we had been doing so far is that we filmed the transformation of the building. What will follow is another transformation. What we have planned on doing early next year is a porcelain manufacture that we will install in this former synagogue building. We will be producing a series of miniature figurines, basically copies of these Roman and Greek copies. So one of the biggest and most famous porcelain manufacturers of Hungary originates from a Jewish family in Tata. So we thought that through this gesture of producing these copies on site, we compress two narratives. We commemorate the disappearance of this Jewish industrial community, and also we remember the politics of the time, this cultural amnesia through which the building was transformed from a synagogue to a museum.